All right, welcome everyone. So we will get started in just a few seconds here. We'll wait for people to start getting logged in. And John, do you want to go over
Yes,
the title of the webinar and our speaker today? Thank you.
yes. Today, welcome everybody. Good afternoon. Uh, Today, our topic is uranium roll front in situ recovery in sedimentary basins, contributing to the global uranium demand for the nuclear renaissance. And our speaker is Michael Campbell of the AIPG Texas section. And Michael is a professional geologist and hydrogeologist with 6 decades of experience in uranium exploration, in situ recovery ISR, groundwater, and environmental projects in the US and internationally. He holds a bachelor's degree in geology and hydrogeology from Ohio State and a master's degree in geology and geophysics from Rice University, where he studied under the Eleanor and Mills Bennett Fellowship. So, Michael, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Thank you, John.
Let's go ahead.
Okay. This webinar will be a little different from what you may have been accustomed to in the past. And I mean by that it'll be more like a talking paper where there'll be graphics that I'll be discussing and references that'll be available in the PDF that will be in the presentation at one form or another, primarily either through AIPG Texas section or through my company website of I2M consulting.com and I2M Corporation. I've got to say that Henry and I, my associate in this paper, would like to really take this opportunity to demonstrate to the students and young professionals who may be attending this webinar on how useful our degrees in geology have been over the years, and especially in hydrogeology and geophysics. And especially to Henry and I, it's been, and you'll hear a little bit as to why. Over the years, I will be describing some of our backgrounds. And in my case, as John mentioned earlier, I've been at it for 60 years, touch wood. I'm staying together reasonably well. And for Henry, some 50 years, and he's staying together quite well, I might add. You also learn how we've been able to pivot our careers as professional geologists and hydrogeologists through those many decades. We know that certain conditions have changed in recent years in the employment area, but Henry and I also had to deal with similar changes in employment conditions. And we found ways to fully employ ourselves in professional geoscience activities that we enjoyed and found interesting, and that provided well for our families over the years. Now let's talk a little bit about what I'm actually going to talk about, and we'll go to the next slide now. And you'll go, whoa, well, this was a simple table of contents on the topics we'll be discussing, but since it didn't fit on one page, I did the old classic Z, so it may even make it more clear for you as you race through the. I'm not going to spell out each one of these because these will be the major topics of each of the slides that I'll be coming up with. So I've got to tell you that in the first part, I'm going to be emphasizing the impact of the nuclear power expansion that's going on. And of course, with nuclear power expansion comes increased pressure on the uranium supply, which there's a special story there that I think you should find interesting. I still find it fascinating, and you'll hear why here in a little bit. So with that in mind, let's move on to you can always refer back to this particular channel or this particular slide anytime you want, if you want to keep up on where we are in the presentation. Okay. As I said earlier, this webinar is intended to be to provide some explanations to where we are in uranium exploration and in nuclear power. And I said earlier, there'll be PDF copies of this particular presentation available to you. Now, to get into what I was talking about earlier about Henry and my background, Henry and I have 2 degrees in geology. Henry's is from Boston University and the University of Texas in El Paso. Mine is from Ohio State and Rice, as you heard from John. I had extensive experience in uranium exploration and in-situ mining over 2 periods. Just after my university graduation, and I won't even mention the year of that, but it was 60 years ago. You do the math. And that lasted from the late 60s until the early 80s. And then another period started up, as you may have heard, in the early 2000s until the present. I was initially employed by the Conoco Mining Group in Sydney, Australia. And you might ask, how did I get to Sydney, Australia? Well, I prepared a memoir just to answer those questions, so I won't go into any details right now. If you're interested, look up my memoir on Amazon.com and you'll get the whole story there. I was, after we did some fantastic work, when I had a fantastic boss in Australia, he saw to it that I got transferred when we were finished with our project down there into the uranium group of Conoco in Denver, who I asked where was the largest budget, and they said in Casper. So off to Casper, and me and my family off to Casper in the middle of the winter, I might add. And after a few years, and that's a story on its own you can learn about. And then I was recruited by Teton Exploration by Rufin I. Rackley, a very well-known figure in the uranium industry in those years and even today. And he's part of our board of directors on I2M Corporation, where I work now. And he's just past 100 years old, and he sounds great on the telephone. But in any event, after Teton, and I went through graduate school. And while there, I did some uranium programs in northern Texas and in Alaska. There will be links on this presentation. You can follow that if you like. And then I did some other work with Fortune 500 companies in Africa. Henry was employed by U.S. Steel Group, uranium group in South Texas, and then with the Cambridge Royalty Group, where he made a significant discovery. You don't know anything about that yet, but I think pretty soon you will through some of our I2M press releases. When the uranium prices fell and the nuclear incident in Pennsylvania caused the media exaggerations, and they were exaggerations, but that was followed by a full-blown disaster in Ukraine, Chernobyl, and because primarily the Russians cut designs in Cold War competition, but no further nuclear power plants were built again in the U.S. for almost 30 years, while other countries, many of whom continue to build nuclear power plants, like France and other people. Note that over the years, almost 100 power plants continue to operate safely and effectively for many decades, as did many more the world around, except for continued activity. Russia provided a lot of the, Kazakhstan were providing a lot of the uranium until 2014. And even now, through some semi-illegal methods and avenues, it's still providing, that you'll hear about here shortly. This is the period when both Henry and I got back into the uranium industry, and we've been working at it ever since. Okay. In 2004, I was appointed as chairman of the AAPG Energy Minerals Division and Rare Earth Committee, serving a few years. And then I was appointed Henry Wise as chairman. In 2010, I left private practice serving industry and the legal community to join an associate in I2M Consulting as chief geologist and chief hydrogeologist. Henry was elected president of the Texas section of the American Institute of Professional Geologists in 2013. and I have the honor of serving as vice president of that Texas section. We both have principal goals is to encourage collaboration between the industrial geoscience and the academic geoscience communities. After 17 years then, after 2013, I resigned as chairman, well, actually after 2004 when I joined the committee, sorry. After 17 years, I resigned as chairman to return to the work in the uranium industry, which was approaching a renaissance, and we both wanted to again contribute to uranium exploration and development in Texas and elsewhere. Then in 2024, my associates and I formed the I2M Corporation, and I was elected president and CEO. Henry was elected as vice president of operations, and we began to build a team to pursue uranium projects in Texas and elsewhere. Our startup company has begun to produce papers and public-oriented articles and reports regarding the safety and importance of developing roll-front deposits in Texas and elsewhere, and have begun to develop promising uranium projects in Texas, particularly with our substantial backgrounds in both uranium and environmental projects, which you will hear about later. There's some examples of those reports. You can click on those and when you get the PDF. Okay, nuclear power plants must have uranium, of course. I'm going to give you a picture of what it looks like worldwide right now. Today, there are about 440 nuclear power plants operating in 31 countries. Over 70 reactors are under construction around the world, and about 115 reactors are planned, most of which are in Asia, by the way. Over the last 20 years, 111 reactors were retired as 101 started operations with a combined capacity of about 400 gigawatts of electricity, providing that amount of electricity, which makes up only about 9% of the world demand. Keep in mind that coal has been and continues to be a major provider of power around the world. And I'll get into that in a little bit later. And I've listed here nuclear power activities, excuse me, in the U.S. and a few of the majors there for you to click to look at. Those are 2026 summary, so it should be pretty up to date. Many countries with existing nuclear power programs have plants who either are building or creating new power plants, and it includes the larger 1,000 megawatt plant, and now something you may have heard about is the SMRs, the small modular reactors that produce somewhere around 300 megawatts, but that can vary. About 30 countries considering planning and starting nuclear power plants with SMRs, and there's a link for you to follow up on that. Now, world consumption of uranium in 2025 is about 138 million pounds of U3O8. Predicted increase in uranium consumption will be about 3 to 5% per year. But by 2040, that increase of consumption will be 6 to 10%. Now, what about the U.S.? As of early 2026, the United States has 94 operating commercial nuclear reactors at 54 power plant sites across 28 states. The U.S. nuclear reactors consume about 50 million pounds of uranium per year. U.S. currently still imports 90% from Canada, Australia, Kazakhstan, Russia, and Uzbekistan. Projected rise to 70 million pounds if planned expansion occurs. On the left here, you'll see this is the new Vogtle reactors in the Georgia, South Carolina border, units 3 and 4 that were just put online in the last few years. Yes, they were over budget and it took forever to get them, but they're beginning to get their act in order. But based on the increased demand for electricity from data centers and for new nuclear plants, large and small, uranium availability will become critical in the near future. The uranium industry is gearing up and very slowly to develop projects and, of course, exploration. This graph is particularly of interest concerning the subject. And you'll see there's a lot of mines in Canada and Australia, but a lot of them are old. There, with there being all the uranium production is projected to be decreasing over the years. With all the new data centers and all the new construction, the demand for uranium is still going to increase. So there will be a gap here. Now, when you say, well, where's it going to come from? Well, uranium is scattered around in all sorts of storage areas, and only recently did Japan start ordering uranium again, because they're getting most of their power plants back on order now, and they had so much uranium fuel in stock that from this date back to when they started to light up their reactors again after they got over the Fukushima issue, they have plenty in stock. So there's lots that are laying around, and companies like Yellowcake in Australia, and then there's another company here in the U.S. that buys uranium and then sits on it. Those are millions of pounds sitting in warehouses waiting to fill in some of these gaps. But that's not the only story. The real story is this, and I find this fascinating. Here's a quote that is a reference there. The U.S. and Russia, this is what started it, the issues that we're having now about the gap. The U.S. and Russia activated the megatons to megawatts program in 1993, which was a $13 billion deal signed to convert 500 tons, about 1 million pounds, of Russian weapons-grade uranium, the highly enriched uranium, out of their nuclear devices, by the way, into fuel for the U.S. nuclear power plants. Now, I remember that period because it was a period when Putin and the U.S. The president and Secretary of State were getting along quite well. And then we bought into that program. And about that time, in the 1980s and late 80s, but just before this megaton and megawatts program was agreed upon, we had about 250 mines in the U.S. that were pumping out U3O8 yellowcake. And we were putting in about 50 million pounds of uranium into the supply line. And in industry employment was about 22,000. Now, come, what is that, the 2000s, the converted fuel from Russia made up about 50% of the U.S. reactor needs. Then by 2013, when the program ended, and that's when Putin got a little squirrely, especially in Ukraine, and he decided that deal was over. That left the U.S. reliant upon cheap Russian uranium. And as of 2023, our operating mines went from 250 down to less than 5. The annual production went from, let's say, 44 million pounds to less than 1 million pounds a year. And more importantly, even industry employment, 22,000 people to less than 110. Henry and I are two of those 110, of course. And what that boils down to is the U.S. uranium production collapsed over those years as cheap Russian fuel flooded the market. In other words, it's like giving somebody drugs and then increasing the price as you want to pull away the drug. It's shocking, and I don't know how that ever happened, but somebody was certainly asleep at the wheel in our government. Okay, this gives you a very good aspect of or perspective of what the price, how the price fluctuates. Across the bottom, you'll see the soft end of the Russian deal was right in here. Now I say soft end. This was just when they were using their they were breaking down their nuclear warheads and preparing the fuel for actual nuclear insertion as opposed to just selling us the yellowcake. But from this period on, they were still selling until the problems developed with serious development with Ukraine and especially now. There's still a certain amount of Russian uranium in the chain that's still coming into the U.S. I might add. Now let's look at how interesting this uranium market tends to be. You'll notice that the price went from about $20 a pound up into as high as $140 a pound, primarily because one of the U.S.'s major sources, while the Russians were still providing the other 50%, was because the Cigar Lake mine flooded in Canada, and the Ranger mine in Australia flooded. That made the spot price go high, and even the contract price is the deal between the producer and the utility, the nuclear utility, even that went up considerably. And then after the prices came down a little bit and the supply became normalized, then this global financial crisis hit 2008, and it slipped off, and you see all this came down. But we were still running our 94 nuclear power plants, and so the price varied from $40 to what, $80, and then it was going back up. And then what happened? Two things. Not only Fukushima happened, but the Ranger tailing overflowed again, and that lost 3 million pounds out of the market. Whereas Fukushima just shut. Well, Fukushima is another example, like 3 Mile Island, a panic in the media. I remember in 1979 when 3 Mile Island hit, I was kind of shocked at that as well, and concerned about nuclear power. But time away from that, and as history developed, it became clear that 3 Mile Island issue was not a serious matter. They handled that well, even though they had very primitive equipment, and some of their valves were just shockingly made, as it turns out, as nuclear power needs to have good valves and electronics and monitoring system. But Fukushima also had a similar problem that the press jumped all over it, and woe is me, and especially when that particular cooling tower or a cooling plant area sort of blew the roof off of it and created a great spectacle, which the press jumped over. I mean, that was just helium being overheated, or water being overheated, creating helium, or creating hydrogen, and that found a spark. And then it got flooded, and there was no way, because of the tsunami took out their power supply. There was no way to keep that from happening. But even so, the Fukushima power plant managing this truly meltdown, they handled it quite well. No one died, no one was irradiated. The fatalities were related to the people that lived around, especially the older people. There were about 500 to 700, something like that, older people that died as a result of this thing. But it was mostly out of just abject fear. And being in Japan, there may be a very good reason for that. But there's still a little hesitancy of moving back into the area around, but there have been no significant exposure in that area. They're getting rid of the water now, and they're turning it loose in the ocean. But it's tritium, excuse me, it's tritium loaded, but it's loaded meaning it's very low concentration. But it's been approved to be distributed, and the solution to pollution does tend to be dilution sometimes. Okay, let's talk about the contracts. The contracts are constitute about 90% of the sales of yellowcake that mines produce. But these are all private sales. The only public is the sales that are listed on the spot price. And these are only make up about 10% of the sales. That makes predicting and all that rather difficult. But the spot market is where the investment groups and the stock exchange deal with, and that's why you get ups and downs so fast, because a lot of it's rumor and no one really knows what's going on in the contract between the producer and the nuclear power plant. That's all secret right now and has been forever, or from the beginning. So anyway, you'll see that every time a large plant reduces production, something happens on the price level, and Kazakhstan announces a 10% cut. Price goes up just a little bit. Cameco suspends McArthur River in Canada, and you see just a little bit of increase in price. Then all of a sudden you get all these plants having trouble, one type or another. Namibia, one of the larger producers in the world these days, had a problem, and it had to shut down. Cameco shut down again. The Kazakhstan started limiting sales. So you see right here is a kind of a bottom. And then all of a sudden, over the years after 2019, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, this started to rise. Well, nuclear plant construction is clearly increasing and all over the world, and it's starting to in the U.S. as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about the SMR issue here pretty soon. But with the threat of nuclear construction increasing, the demand will be there and the price will therefore go up. Excuse me. Now, when will that happen? It's already up into the 80s now, 90s, and there's if you check on some of the monitoring materials that we have that we're using for staying up on what's going on in the uranium field, you'll see that that there's all sorts of indications that the price may go up to not only $100, it may go up to $200 and $300. And all that's expected to start to become perfectly clear in next year or the year after. So that's why if you're a mine wanting to get back into operation, you should be in operation sometime in the next couple of years anyway to start taking advantage of this major increase in price. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the SMRs. Most of the activity around the consumption of uranium is with respect to the SMRs, although there's going to be a number of the larger 1,000 megawatt plants built, mostly by Westinghouse. But the SMRs meet all sorts of qualifications. Once I learned that this was a serious design future, must have been 10, 20 years ago, started hearing about it. But these small modular reactors go somewhere around 300 megawatts. Now, the interesting thing is they are manufactured in a plant and brought to the site in a truck. And then it's inserted into infrastructure that is awaiting its arrival. And then power goes on and you're off to the races with power of somewhere around 300-400 megawatts. The important thing is you can start off with a 300 megawatt plant, but if you need more, you can just add another one and then another one, and then you keep building how much ever you need. And if you build out and you have to turn some of them off, that's okay. But then you can reroute where you sell your power. They also have a micro modular reactor design, a number of them actually. And I find those especially interesting because between micro modular reactors and small modular reactors, you're going to see those, in our opinion, you're going to see those come up into subdivisions around the major cities. So this business of widespread blackouts like we had a few years ago in Houston, those were not likely to happen again once these SMRs and even some of these micro modular reactors get put into place and have shown that they operate appropriately. And all signs are that they are building them to last, which brings me back to the building of the larger reactors. Keep in mind that the major complaint about the large reactors, the 1,000 megawatt reactors like the AP1000 of the Westinghouse group, the reason those tend to be so expensive It's not only because of extensive environmental and regulatory issues that draws time out, and time is money, but it's also because they're built to last. And what do I mean last? Well, think of them in terms of being very similar to building a hydroelectric nuclear power hydroelectric dam, and how expensive they are. Well, they're built to last 50 to 100 years, if not more. Well, it turns out that the large nuclear power plants are built the same way. That's why they cost so much, because they will in fact last, and they're getting extensions down to 50 years, and many people believe that they can even go to 100 years. And once you start doing the economics on that, that makes those power plants just ginning off major profitability toward the latter part of their existence, after the initial let's say high cost of construction is amortized. So anyway, these small modular reactors and micros, they're all built around safety and reliability to operate in all weather conditions. Not unlike wind installations and solar systems that are subject to weather and other issues, and operation and maintenance costs that are much higher than they ever anticipated they would be. But I don't discount wind and solar, because they are serving an important role here in transition. And in certain places in this country, they will be the answer for a long time. But we figure that the SMRs will be coming in and be replacing a lot of the wind and solar operations in the U.S. for sure, and this will happen similarly around the world. When will the SMRs be ready to go? Well, some of them are in construction now and could be in the next few years. Of course, I've been saying that for 10 years. It's like other power possibilities that it's taken forever to come in, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. So what are the companies that are looking at? We're looking at least 53 that are looking at designing and selling the SMRs. The ones we are showing here are the one in the box, are the ones that are likely to show up first, primarily because they have most of the money behind them, and most of the political infrastructure is all laid in and all that. But there are some other ones that but there may be even some coming out as a dark horse that will come out and show their strength. So we've got serious competition in SMRs. All right, let's talk a little bit about the used fuel. When the fuel comes out of a nuclear power plant, it's called waste, and in the past it's been stored in these casks down here in the lower left, and there's never been any serious evidence of any radioactive leaking or what have you from these sites. Since the 1970s, the federal government, though, has failed in attempts to provide a waste storage facility that not only because there was not any technical issues, but it was just pure politics as to why they haven't come in with a place to store all these. But the project that failed after billions of dollars were spent was the Yucca Mountain Repository in Nevada. And there's a link to it. And you might ask why. Well, Jim Conca, one of our board of directors, worked on that Yucca Mountain project. And he tells me that a lot of it was because the hydrogeology didn't support it. The volcanics that particular Yucca Mountain repository was built into was rather leaky, let's say, in a non-technical way. So if you want to read more about that, it's in that clip. Okay, the used fuel, in our opinion, and based on all the research that's going on, is far less of a volume that you might think. In fact, there's certain sections of it, the highly radioactive, the high U-235 aspects of it, will need to be put away. But the lesser storage, the lesser radioactivity levels won't be. But how much is that? Well, if you take all the power, the waste, let's call it used fuel, wasted in those canisters scattered around the country, there are, you put it all together, they will not make up more than a football field and a half, 30 feet high. So you'll see that is not a lot of volume. Now there are thousands of these storage containers around, and so we'll have to see how that develops. But the project remains, though. There is a successful government project in the WIP project. And Jim Conca also worked for that WIP project for a number of years in New Mexico. But that's for transuranic waste, pure waste from the Defense Department, and that means from nuclear devices and what have you.
Michael, you got about 10 minutes left.
Okay, all right. So, geez, where does uranium occur in the world? If you notice on the right here, we've got quite a lot in the ground, $12 billion. Okay, but if we ever run short, there's also beginning research on uranium in the ocean water. There's a lot of work that needs to be done and what have you. Let's move on here. Okay, here's a map that shows you where all the quote unquote abandoned uranium mines are. Well, these are not mines. These are any place anybody found a radioactive rock. And just because it's a radioactive rock does not mean there's a mine. This was put into some of the Native American group requirements on how much damage occurred during that. But there are new mines coming in here, volcanics in the southeastern Oregon, of course. The normal mines in Wyoming that are in situ recovery projects are in Wyoming, Colorado. Underground uranium deposits are in New Mexico and Arizona and southern Utah. And of course in South Texas that we'll get to shortly. I've got to mention that over here, there's one place here called the Coles Hill uranium deposit that is 130 million pounds in the ground. That is world class, and it will develop one day. Now, here's where the actual locations of the uranium are, where the mines actually are, and here we're looking at Texas. In the beginning, Texas started off at very shallow because people could stumble over outcrops of radioactiveness. Okay, here's a mine, and then slowly over the years, start building down deeper and deeper as you go toward the coast here. I worked on this project right here at Alta Mesa for in 2008 to do one of their studies. Okay, here's the Conquista mine that was opened in the late 50s, early 60s, and this shows the oxidized zone in the wall of the mine. There's a roll front of the uranium. And there's also roll fronts sometimes in these roll front deposits that have molybdenum zones and selenium zones. But some of them, they may or may not be economic to recover. So you have an oxidized core, uranium mineralized front, and other things around it. Okay, here's one of the first evaluations that involved decided to evaluate it from a point of biogeochemical cell development. We got bacteria, sulfite reducing bacteria and iron bacteria, and along this interface is where the bugs get together, and their byproduct is the U3O8. Okay. Another thing I won't mention, well, I will. One of the interesting things is that the U238, U234, U238 isotopes are very different behind the roll front as opposed to in front of the roll front. So that helps in many exploration programs. The biogeochemical cell movement is slower than the rate of groundwater flow, estimated by some 200 times slower than that, actually caused by the hydraulic gradient of groundwater. Okay, down in South Texas where I work, there's a roll fronts and associated with a fault. We'll talk about that in a second. Here's a classification of South Texas mines and what the mineral associations are with uraninite and the roll front, of course, and oxidized iron and unoxidized iron in the front. Here's one in the Oakville Formation in South Texas. You'll notice another fault involved. You see these can be, the green is where the mines were formed. This is a cross section. This is the Catahoula. This is where the source of the uranium was in the volcanic ash that got included into the groundwater and then got formed by encountering reductants from all over the place, either with respect to fluvial sands and well, you might find carbonaceous material in with that, or with some other sort of reductant like hydrogen sulfide coming up faults and what have you. This is a rendition of what it looked like in Wyoming, and you'll notice a similarity to the Texas roll fronts. Here's a Texas roll front, very similar, high grade in the dark here, unaltered sediments, heavily oxidized core. This is to show in Wyoming, for example. Well, this is a Wyoming roll front, but it's similar to the roll front configuration. This is sort of a map view of an underground mine, shallow underground mine in Wyoming that I was down into that and saw a lot of that. And it's a interesting place to be, put it this way. Here's cross-section views of what the roll fronts look like when you're mapping them in a mine, in an underground mine, and you'll get some calcite formed, and the red is all high radioactivity. These are noses, the front part of the roll front. Here's some of the things that we deal with in terms of when you're out looking for that front. You're trying to find the contact between the oxidized front and the roll front. And you do that by drilling one hole, another hole, until you locate between, and then you follow that line across that way until you find a mineralized section of it. They're not all mineralized, but they are in favorable sites. You get 5-foot samples here, and there's typical water well drilling rigs. This is drilling what we call installing the production patterns. Close space, usually 75 to 100 feet apart. This is a geological guide for geologists who are sitting on these wells, as they're called, and taking samples and describing the mineralogy and what have you. And those are geophysical logs that show the tails. You're behind the front, and noses. These are called noses out here, and because that shows up in the middle of the sand, and you know where you are with respect to the roll front itself. Okay, one of the most important things in evaluating a uranium deposit is the hydrogeological aspects, much more than and with surface mining or underground mining. And I won't go into that detail now, except it's one of the major features of. And if you've had your hydrogeology in school, the Tice equations and Hamtush and Jacob and all those are standard pumping tests that deal with. Here's the production zones here in the 5-spot pattern where they injected CO2, O2 fluids into the roll front, and then is produced and taken to the processing plant. This is what it looks like in Wyoming. The piping in between is underground because it gets cold, and here it is in South Texas, and leave the piping on the surface. Okay, in permitting, you'll see these are the production patterns. Here are the retrieval lines. Each of these are surrounded by monitoring well rings. That is a monitoring well, and fences, so that anybody that shouldn't be there can be restrained from coming in. This is what it looked like in Texas, in the South Texas, on their particular production zones. It's very similar. Okay, this is your typical recovery system, introducing the O2 and the CO2. And then this picks up in the resin. The resin is loaded into trucks and then taken to a large processing plant to create yellowcake. This yellowcake is not very radioactive. It's then produced by centrifuges to increase the U-235 to a level that can be used. The bombs are usually 90% or higher than 235, but you have to run these centrifuges for a long time to get it to enrich to, and the heavier stuff goes down this way, and then it's put into, it comes out of yellowcake, but it has to go through a gaseous phase, and then into a dioxide, and then into fuel pellets to fuel appendices. Now, principal conclusions, I think it's pretty clear. It should be pretty clear by now that uranium is widespread in the environment, in the soil and groundwater in low concentrations. Uranium is concentrated by natural subsurface processes at favored sites as a natural contaminant within some aquifers. Uranium is recovered by subsurface fluids under strict hydrogeological control. And the rest, I think, is pretty clear. Yes, I enjoy that too. Okay, this is pretty much the end, or is it just the beginning of your appreciation of exploring and recovering uranium for naturally occurring uranium mineralization in fluvial sands where only some small areas are naturally contaminated within useful aquifers in Texas? In closing, let me say that our recommendations to students and young professionals are that you should get involved in your local geological club and begin to overcome any hesitancy to engage with your geological associates. After graduation, get active in your local geological society. And if you intend to become a licensed professional geologist, you should consider American Institute of Professional Geologists. Remember, the better connected you are with your geological professionals around you, the more career opportunities will be open to now and over the years. The future looks good for geologists in uranium and mining industries and in off-world remote projects for spacefaring companies, I find, and in the environmental remediation consulting industry and in other industries. They will need geologists, and thank you very much. That's it.
Thank you very much, Michael. That was very interesting. I'm sorry we had to rush a bit at the end, though. But we have a bunch of questions in the chat here.
Okay.
Steve Stikowski says, can you post the links to 12M in the chat? I guess 12M is one of the slides.
Yeah, if you want any of the links, remember, this presentation will be in a PDF
right.
on either the AIPG Texas section or on the I2M Consulting webpage in the news section. Yep. So yep. All of these that are underlined in blue are links that you can all you have to do when you get the PDF is to click it and you'll get that.
Great, that's good. Then Steve says, Steve Stikowski in Georgia says, are the SNAP reactors developed for spacecraft the same as micromodular reactors?
No, I was wondering that too. And as far as I know, they have an entirely different system for the rocket ability, and quite frankly, I'm not up on it enough to comment on it right now. But it shouldn't be difficult to look into it on Google or Perplexity or any of those, and they'll bring you up to date. and that underscores the value of how we're getting instant information now. If you want to know about something, you get on one of these AIs like Perplexity and ask the questions. Make sure your question is specific. If you remember when this started off, you heard that there was a lot of hallucinating by the AI answers. Well, those are getting fewer and fewer, but you still have to check them to make sure that they're right. So,
yeah. And what about thorium reactors? Isn't it the follow-up Steve had?
Yeah, I've been following that, and thorium gets occasionally a lot of play, but thorium also needs to go through a uranium cycle to work anyway. Thorium is not fissile. It does not put out the radiation the type that the U-235, U-233 actually also uses. So we tried to develop, meaning the U.S. tried to develop the thorium reactors decades and decades ago. And it didn't work primarily out of expediency, I suspect, because uranium was much more handily and available, apparently, while we were making bombs, of course. But the fact is, we put that on the shelf, and the Russians picked up on it, or the Chinese, one of the two. They picked up on all that work that we did, and they have developed a thorium reactor. But the last word I remember reading is it's still a pain in the neck. But if we run out of uranium in the next 50 years or so, I suspect that they'll probably be ready to go into the thorium cycle. If in fact the fusion plants that seem to be developing rather rapidly, or the technology seems to be developing rather rapidly these days, it doesn't come into play first. But so it's not that thorium doesn't have a place, but it's still behind uranium as a principal fissile source of power.
Renee Thomas says, what is the general water requirement for running a single SMR?
Not much. In fact, SMRs don't use much water at all.
Okay. And then various people asking for the slides, and I think we've answered that one. Wendy Davidson in headquarters has said we're going to ask you if you'll provide the slides to the AIPG national website as well.
Okay.
And the webinar is being recorded and will be available on the AIPG YouTube channel.
Okay, good.
And then there's a link to subscribe to it given here in the chat. So we'll leave the chat up for a couple of minutes for people to get that link. There's also the link to the assessment quiz for New York CEUs up there already. And let me see, we've got any more questions here. Emily Olson says, geologist resident of South Texas here, drinking well water a couple of miles south of an old uranium mine. What ions and components should be tested in my well to ensure we're still ahead of and not within the previous roll front?
That actually is a good question. And I'll tell you why, because being down, as long as you know you're down dip in the groundwater flow system, remember that the roll front moves incredibly slowly relative to the flow of groundwater in the fluvial sands that they find themselves in. And to answer your question, you should have established a baseline of what your groundwater looked like. When you moved in, you should have had your well tested, presuming you're operating from a well, and you would have that basis. And then if in fact you take a water sample now and you compare the two, if there's substantially difference, I would call the TCEQ and ask for instructions.
Okay.
But
And then,
you want, yeah, you want to make sure that there's a difference in constituents, because you won't get uranium unless there's another source of uranium that you may not be aware of that's not associated with that you're citing. Of course, to answer your question directly, you test for uranium, radium, the daughter product of uranium breakdown, there's a few other things that you could test, but just look at the difference. If there's a significant difference, call the TCEQ and just ask for guidance.
yeah. Are there other rare, this is from Zach Klein, are there other rare or critical minerals that appear in assemblage with uranium-bearing minerals?
Say that again.
Are there other rare or critical minerals that occur along with the uranium-bearing minerals?
Not in roll front deposits.
Okay.
In hard rock, in hard rock, there may well be. In fact, in West Texas, in the volcanics where the rare earth deposits were first found, there is also some uranium, and in fact enough to be able to sell separately, but it wouldn't be enough to drive the economics. Well, it would certainly improve the economics if the price goes up. But the answer to that is yes, but sort of not really. But when you get into other odd uranium deposits, like the one we worked on in the Seward Peninsula, for example, we ended up with extremely high uranium, thorium, and rare earths were just sky high in the let's call them the igneous rocks of that particular area. But what's interesting there is those rocks represent a particularly good source of uranium for the nearby tertiary base, which I have been convinced for years that that's a whole nother uranium district, and we hope to get to it here one of these days, and pay some attention to it, because we may need a new district or two in this world to get to the fusion power, which we're all really looking forward to, and maybe that will take care of matters in the future.
I think some of the carbonatite pipes in Brazil contain both uranium and rare earth minerals. That's correct, isn't it, Michael?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I believe you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's a question from
uranium is extremely widespread. It's not a rare element. Remember, it's spread out. Any groundwater that you have and that we drink, you can expect there's going to be 2, 3, up to 5 parts per billion of uranium in it. At least in the Gulf Coast, you will see that to be the case. Good or bad? Well, some people buy the ion exchange for their water supply under their sink, just to get rid of that 3 to 5 parts per billion. But you're looking for centers of cancer and what have you, and they don't appear.
Mm-hmm. Then Jim says, what is the deepest depths that typical ISR can operate?
That's a very good question too. Well, it turns out it's directly relative to the price that you can get. It used to be, you remember what I said earlier, it started off in the surface and it got deeper and deeper. Well, the deeper, I remember in Wyoming in the 60s or in the early 70s, I was looking at a site or at a region and doing some drilling on it for Teton exploration, and we were drilling at 400 or 500 feet, and that was marginal economic. Now in South Texas in 2008 when I worked for the what has become known as the Incor Corporation. Before that was Mestina Mines. They have mineralization down to 1,500 feet. They are now, and I know they have 20 some rigs drilling, as they say, 20 some rigs churning on the properties northeast of the processing plant in Alta Mesa. And they figure that with the increasing price comes we can go deeper. So let's say at $100 a pound, if you can go to $1,500, if it goes to 200, you can go deeper. And we have a reason to believe that there are sites that are showing that deep. But so far, they've been, let's say, less than 1,000 feet is normal now. We're looking at a few, well, greater than 500 feet, and working in around 800 feet. So,
and then there's John Yelich made a couple of comments here. Good presentation, Michael. I permitted the first ISL at Reno Creek in the Powder River Basin, and he also permitted the Virginia coal deposit from Union Carbide in 1985. And Michael Neerup mentions that Denison is using in situ recovery for its deposit in northern Saskatchewan, probably 650 to 800 meters depth. So
deep, did you say, or thick? You said 800 meters thick or deep?
Deep.
Deep, yeah, okay, yeah. Well, that's what, that's 2,500 feet or something like that.
Yeah,
so,
that's right.
That may be an underground proposition.
I don't know.
Well, maybe not,
Michael didn't.
The rocks may not accommodate that. Yeah, right.
But those are rich deposits up in northern Saskatchewan. I know that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're up to the hour. No, Michael says it's in situ recovery in northern Saskatchewan.
No, I don't. No, I don't say that. I was thinking Newfoundland and some parts of Ontario have got some sediments that look like, but I don't know about for sure whether that's in situ.
Yeah. Okay, we're past the hour, top of the hour, and thank you very much, Michael. You've got a lot of congratulatory comments in the chat on your presentation, and
okay, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
You bet.
We'll see you on Wednesday night for our meeting, or Thursday night for our meeting.
Hopefully, yes.
Goodbye, everybody.